Hello, I'm Rob. Welcome to 6 Minute English. I'm joined today by Neil.
Hi there, Rob. Yes, I'm Neil.
Now, Neil, tell me, when you think of skyscrapers, the very tall, thin buildings, which cities do you think of?
Well, probably New York, Shanghai, perhaps Dubai.
Well, London is also the home to a growing number of skyscrapers, with nicknames like the Gherkin, the Walkie-Talkie and the Cheese Grater. But not everyone likes them. Do you like them, Neil?
Well, I like the nicknames. I think they're really fun. And actually, I quite like the buildings too. They're quirky, which means unusual, odd, in a nice way.
Yeah, I agree. But today we'll be talking about why many people are unhappy about these new skyscrapers and learning some language about towns and buildings. But first,
a question, Rob.
yeah, of course. For many years, the tallest building in London was St. Paul's Cathedral. But when was it built? Was it completed in A, 1508, B, 1608, or C, 1708?
Well, I think that it was C, 1708.
OK, well, we'll find out if you're right or wrong at the end of the programme. Well, let's start our discussion with that very building, St. Paul's Cathedral in central London.
We're going to hear from BBC reporter Jonathan Savage. Which adjective does he use to describe the height of St. Paul's? And which word does he use to say that it now seems much smaller than the skyscrapers nearby?
This is St Paul's Cathedral in central London. It's a modest 111 metres high, but for nearly 300 years it was the tallest building in this city. Now it's dwarfed by nearby skyscrapers, many of which have sprung up in just the last few years. They've got irreverently British nicknames like the Gherkin, the Cheese Grater and the Walkie-Talkie.
So, we heard those three skyscrapers again, but what about St Paul's? He said it was a modest 111 metres high. Modest here means not large in size or amount. It means it's only 111 metres.
That was the adjective. And the other word we asked you to listen out for was dwarfed. St. Paul's is dwarfed by the nearby skyscrapers. If something dwarfs another thing, it makes it seem small in comparison.
Yes, and this has happened recently. He says the new buildings have sprung up in the last few years. When he says they've sprung up, he means they've suddenly appeared, and it's often used to talk about buildings.
And he also used a great word to talk about those nicknames. He said they were irreverently British nicknames. If something is irreverent, it doesn't show the respect you might expect for official things, and often treats serious subjects in quite a fun, jokey way.
By calling them irreverently British, he suggests that being irreverent is quite typically British. Now, Rob, you're quite typically British, but are you irreverent?
I think I am. I joke about everything. But whether these nicknames are respectful or not, as I mentioned, many people are not happy with these tall new buildings. What reasons does Jonathan Savage give?
They're not universally popular. Some say they obstruct sight lines of old-fashioned landmarks like this one, that they threaten London's cultural identity, that they're just plain ugly. A group of high-profile Londoners, politicians, artisans and academics are now campaigning to halt this incoming tide. They say more than 200 more skyscrapers are being thoughtlessly thrown up across London.
OK, so what were their reasons? They said they obstruct sightlines. They block the views of some older landmarks.
They also threaten London's cultural identity, and some think they're just plain ugly. The word plain in this context emphasises the adjective that follows. Just plain ugly means very ugly.
Indeed. Well, that's the opinion of this group, but not of all Londoners. Nonetheless, they're working to halt or to stop the incoming tide of new skyscrapers. An incoming tide is the rise of the sea that happens every day, which makes it come further into the land. A strong image and a lovely idiom to use when something is happening more and more.
Yes, earlier we heard the phrasal verb spring up. Which similar phrasal verb was used by the reporter?
They say more than 200 more skyscrapers are being thoughtlessly thrown up across London.
Thrown up. If something is thrown up, it's made quickly and without a lot of care.
But be careful, to throw up also has a different meaning, which is to vomit or be sick. Rob, have you got a head for heights?
I've certainly got a head for heights, and it doesn't make me sick being up high.
Well, in that case, you're unlikely to throw up from the top of one of these buildings.
Indeed. Well, back to the ground level to answer today's question. Earlier, I asked you when St. Paul's Cathedral was finished. Was it in 1508, 1608 or 1708?
And I said 1708.
OK, and you were right. They actually started building it back in 1675.
Yes, not too long after the Great Fire of London in 1666, which is why they had to rebuild it.
Thank you, Neil, and thank you everyone for listening. Do join us again next time for more 6-Minute English from BBC Learning English. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Hello and welcome to 6-Minute English from BBC Learning English. I'm Rob and with me is Finn. Hello, Finn. Finn, are you okay?
49 seconds. I was just holding my breath,
Right.
Rob.
Okay, is this a new hobby of yours?
Well, actually today we're talking about people living underwater. So I thought I could do with some practice.
Okay, well, why don't you get your breath back now?
Good, yes, good idea.
Today we'll be hearing about scientists who broke the world record for the time spent underwater. They spent an incredible 31 days under the waves. And we'll be learning some related vocabulary too. Right, are you ready now, Finn?
Yeah, I think so. And are you ready, Rob, for this week's question?
Yes, hit me with it.
This week's question is, what is the longest time a human being has held their breath underwater? Is it A, 12 minutes, B, 18 minutes, or C, 22 minutes?
Goodness. Well, it's a long duration, all of them. I'm going to go for the middle one, B, 18 minutes.
18 minutes, Good guess. I'll tell you if you're right or wrong at the end of the programme. But, Rob, don't hold your breath.
Ah, very good. Don't hold your breath. A phrase which means don't expect that a particular good thing will happen. Anyway, what about these scientists? Did they hold their breath for 31 days?
No, but they did live underwater in a laboratory. Now, that's a room or building with scientific equipment in it for doing tests.
Right. Well, one of the men was Fabien Cousteau, who's an oceanographer, someone who studies the oceans. He's the grandson of Jacques Cousteau, a French man who held the previous record of 30 days underwater.
Fabien said he wanted to break his grandfather's record to raise awareness of ocean conservation. Now, that's protecting and looking after the ocean.
Well, he's raised our awareness, at least.
He has indeed.
Now, I'm interested in how they lived underwater. Listen to Fabien talking about the laboratory called Aquarius. Which word does he use to say that the lab is completely underwater?
Aquarius is very unique in that it's the only undersea marine laboratory. It gives us a unique platform from which to live and explore this final frontier on our planet.
He called it an undersea laboratory. Now, undersea is, as you might guess, a word similar to underwater, and it means under the sea.
And he called this undersea world the final frontier. It's an interesting phrase. It comes from the Star Trek television series, which called space the final frontier. The last place that humans have not yet travelled to. The last place to explore.
Yes, and apparently this laboratory was 18 metres under the sea in Florida. And being there allowed them to spend less time diving and more time observing marine life.
Okay, marine life. So that means of the sea. So marine life means sea life, plants and animals that live in the sea. They were particularly interested in investigating the effects of pollution on coral.
Now, I know they did this to raise awareness of marine conservation, but what I'm really interested in is what life was like for them. What was it like to live underwater for so long?
Good question. Well, surprisingly, perhaps, life there wasn't too bad. They had air conditioning, hot water and internet access.
Sounds very comfortable, doesn't it? Although I do know that Fabien struggled with one aspect. Now, listen to him to find out what.
Unfortunately for me as a French person, the food will also be simulated. Freeze-dried, astronaut type of food, canned foods, things like that. So it's a horror show for me.
Poor Fabien. He said the food was pretty awful. Maybe it was English food.
Probably. As a Frenchman, he wasn't impressed by the freeze-dried food. Now, that means food which is quickly frozen and dried to preserve it.
Yes, he thought it was astronaut-style food. The sort of food you would eat as an astronaut, someone who travels into space.
Now, and coming back to dry land, they had to spend 16 hours decompressing.
Yes, that's very important. Divers have to decompress to return to their original body pressure when they come out of the water.
It sounds like a long time to wait for a good meal. So, Rob, what do you think? Would you like to live underwater for a month?
Absolutely not.
No,
I would
not at
get
all.
very claustrophobic. I
Not
hate
even
those sort of spaces.
The astronaut food. So anyway, let's see if you got this week's question right. I asked you what you thought the world record for holding your breath for underwater was.
And I went for 18 minutes.
And actually, it was even longer than that.
Wow.
22 minutes, 0 seconds. By a chap called Stig Severinsen, who's from Denmark. And Stig was allowed to hyperventilate, so to breathe very fast and deeply, using oxygen before the attempt. So I think don't try this at home, anyone. That brings us to the end of today's 6-Minute English. We hope you've enjoyed today's underwater programme. And please join us again soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.